I think it's safe to say that Kamen Rider Ryuki was a pretty influential work of television. Not only would its core story premise, the Rider War, go on to hugely impact the Kamen Rider franchise as a whole, with several seasons of the show even up to now providing their own takes on the idea, especially the one written by Gen Urobuchi. It also played no small part in shaping roughly the next 20 years of anime that would follow in its wake, especially the ones written by Gen Urobuchi. Interestingly, it also bears the honor of being the basis for the second of two attempts at adapting a Kamen Rider season for Western audiences, after the abject failure that was 1995's Saban's Masked Rider, an adaptation of Kamen Rider Black RX by way of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. There would be no further acknowledgement of the franchise from this side of the globe until 2008, which saw the first airing of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, an American adaptation of Ryuki that, by all accounts, was actually pretty good. Stephen Sean Ford, the actor who played the lead role of Kit Taylor, describes Dragon Knight as the underappreciated bastard son of the Kamen Rider franchise, which I think sets us up nicely to talk about something that isn't a TV show. See, Dragon Knight actually got its own video game, a fighting game made by our guys at Eighting no less, and much like its TV counterpart, it's surprisingly solid, but I've never really seen anyone talk about it. So I think it's about time we poked around in Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, the underappreciated bastard son of the Climax Heroes franchise. Sort of. Look, I'm just gonna put an asterisk right here. Now, bear with me, I'll try to explain. For most of the series' life, Climax Heroes games were released annually to coincide with each new season of the show. Climax Heroes Double in 2009, O's in 2010, Forze in 2011, and the infamous Super Climax Heroes in 2012 to coincide with Kamen Rider Wizard. But point of interest number one, the first Climax Heroes, the one on the PS2, was also released in 2009, just 4 months before Climax Heroes Double. But still, so far so good, right? Spend maybe a couple years developing Climax Heroes, then have a skeleton team make the assets for the 2-in-1 detective, shove it all onto a Wii disc and call it Climax Heroes Double. Done. Except, point of interest number 2. 2009 also saw the release of the subject of this video, Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, just 1 month before Climax Heroes Double. And you'd think that maybe this isn't a problem either. Grab all the Ryuki riders from Climax Heroes Double, stick them in a slightly modified engine from one of your other games, and you're good to go. And yeah, that'd be fine. So long as you're cool with this game having only 2 characters and 0 single-player content. Because by the time of Climax Heroes, Eighting had only created 2 Ryuki riders. Ryuki and his I'm you but stronger evil palette swap Ryuga, which meant that for Dragon Knight, Eighting had to model, rig, and animate 14 characters out of the game's roster of 16 from scratch, with a non-zero chance that the development cycles for the first 2 Climax Heroes games, Fate Unlimited codes, Castlevania Judgment, at least 1 version of Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, and possibly 3 whole Naruto games all fit somewhere into this period of time. But this wouldn't have been Eighting's first rodeo. They know their way around a tight development cycle, and they're no strangers to cutting corners. In fact, the point of all this preamble is to give some context to a discussion about how the corners this game cuts are what end up making it such a unique and compelling fighting game, especially among Eighting's other Kamen Rider games. So let's start from the top. You've got a bunch of characters you've just made, all using move lists you've copied from other games you've made. Like, for real, there is literally a dude using Castlevania Judgment animations in here. And now you need something to put them in. Grab any old fighting engine you have lying around, and there's Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. On the surface, the game looks pretty similar to the system used in Climax Heroes Forze, but the more you play it, the more the similarities fall away, and it becomes its own thing. Unless, that is, you're way too deep in the endless 8-ing rabbit hole, in which case the game's similarities to Climax Heroes will instead give way to the perhaps slightly cursed knowledge that this is literally just a reskinned, lightly modified version of Naruto Gekito Ninja Taisen EX. The game is, of course, meaningfully distinct from GNT EX as far as gameplay goes, but the engine that powers it does go a long way to defining the game feel and some little bits of tech and mechanical trivia we can find within Dragon Knight. Movement is pretty restrictive as far as 3D games go. Walking is slow, cancel options for dashes are highly limited, and while sidesteps are fast and snappy, they're also almost completely useless thanks to just about every attack tracking sidesteps like nobody's business. This means that outside of occasional bouts of jockeying for position, most of the game is played up close in the messy guessy zone. And one of the more interesting things about this game is that it inherits an astoundingly robust set of mechanics for facilitating said messy guessies from its Naruto-themed forebears. But how messy are we talking here? As is par for the course, there's no distinction between blocking high or low. All attacks are blocked the same way by either standing still or holding back. This means that the core mix-up of Dragon Knight is a strike-throw mix-up, and it's refreshingly old school. Every character has exactly 6 attack strings, performed with directional inputs and the light or heavy attack buttons, which form the basis for every combo by way of a handful of links and fairly flexible juggle combos. Strings all have extremely long delay windows, which makes them perfect for setting up frame traps at whatever timing you feel like. This combines with the game's throws, which are performed with forward and both attack buttons. They impact on frame 1, and rather than giving players the ability to break throws instead universally lose to normal attacks, which essentially boils the core mix-up down to raw Virtua Fighter 2 fundamentals, as blocking a jab essentially is a 50-50 situation on its own. Do you mash to beat the throw and risk eating a counter hit, or do you block to avoid the frame trap and risk getting thrown? This decision-making process is further informed by the game's guard meter, which adds an extra layer of brutality to the game's already terrifying pressure. Blocking attacks will fill up your guard meter, and once it's full, you're put into guard break state, which completely disables your ability to block and causes you to take extra damage from all attacks until your guard meter empties. Combined with the weakness of sidesteps and the fact that your guard meter stops draining when you're in hit stun, you can basically think of guard break as another win condition alongside KO and timeout, because if you get your guard broken, you're sure to face death by repeated inescapable resets. But of course, it wouldn't be an 8-ing game without some wacky varied uses for a secondary resource, so let's take a look at the Advent Gauge. The Advent Gauge is split into 5 segments, and it fills up in all the ways a super meter usually does. There are 3 broad ways to spend your meter: rider cancels, summoning your contract monster, and activating vent cards. Rider cancels are the simplest of the Advent Gauge options, and will be pretty familiar territory to anyone that's played a Climax Heroes game before. By pressing ZL during an attack, you'll spend a bit over 1 bar of the Advent Gauge to install a free cancel point onto the attack, allowing you to cancel it into any other normal attack at any point during the move's animation. This is mostly used to extend combos and block strings, but by utilizing Kara throws, you can effectively RC a normal attack into a throw, which basically means any blocked normal represents a 50-50 mix-up if there's meter on the table. Every character has access to a unique assist attack by summoning their contract monster with the X button. There are 2 ways to summon your contract monster: an offensive summon for 2 bars, and a defensive summon for 3.5 bars. The offensive summon can be used basically whenever, and its uses differ depending on the character. Some are good for extending combos, while others are better for keeping the opponent locked down or for covering your neutral. The defensive summon can be used whenever you're in hit stun, block stun, or in any part of a knockdown or tech roll animation. It's a quick unblockable attack that will knock the opponent away but won't do any damage. Finally, there are the vent cards, which basically act as your character's special moves. Every character goes into a match with 5 cards in their deck. 4 regular vent cards, which can be customized on the character select screen, as well as the mandatory final vent, which is your character's super, and it's unblockable, naturally. Every card costs a different amount of meter to use and can only be used once per round, which makes each card use a kind of resource management consideration on its own. Outside of the final vents, each vent card can be categorized as either a weapon or an ability. Weapons grant your character access to a special weapon that changes their heavy normals and usually increases their damage for about 6 seconds. These range from swords to staves to shoulder-mounted tank buster cannons, which is awesome. Abilities, on the other hand, are a bit closer to a standard special move, with their effects depending on the card and the character. Every character has access to 2 universal ability cards though. Confined Vent, which blocks your opponent's ability to use their strongest card, usually their final vent, and Return Vent, which exists exclusively to counteract the effects of Confined Vent. One interesting thing about vent cards is that their activations can be used to cancel dash animations and also block stun. Guard Cancel Vent activation isn't really useful with anything other than Final Vent though, and even then, supers aren't invincible, so it's not a sure thing that you'll land the super for free, but being able to bank all your meter and your once per round super on an unblockable Guard Cancel is pretty funny. By this point, you've probably got the impression that this game is pretty simple, and it is. Which is why Dragon Knight's characters are so interesting, because they're surprisingly diverse given just how simple the game that surrounds them is, especially given just how many characters share moves. So let's take a look at our motley crew of spandex-clad warriors and see what they've got going on. Dragon Knight, being the character the show and game is named after, is your standard all-rounder protagonist character. He's got a good jab and a really strong forward heavy, which he can use in both combos and mix-ups, but his real strength comes from his versatility, since he has access to sword and strike vent, which he can use to give himself more rewarding close range tools or a much appreciated ranged presence respectively. Wing Knight gets to have a sword without spending meter for it, and he uses that sword to control space with strong pokes that lead into powerful juggles. He's got this really interesting down light string where the second part has 3 hits, but he can transition to the final part of the string on any of those 3 hits, which gives him some really interesting ways to vary up his stagger pressure. He's also got Trick Vent, which summons an AI-controlled clone of himself for some shenanigans. Our Knights Dragon and Wing also have powered up Survive Mode forms, which are available as secret unlockable characters. Survive Mode Dragon Knight feels pretty underwhelming compared to Dragon Knight, but he does have Strange Vent, which can copy an opponent's weapon vent, so that's nice. Survive Mode Wing Knight has less impressive vent card options than Wing Knight, but makes up for it by having insane range on his down heavy and incredibly funny low gravity juggle states on basically everything he does. Torque is the character who shoots you with a gun in real life. His heavy normals are all gunshots, and on top of being really good at zoning people out, they also let him do the sickest loops which comprise his bread and butter combos. He's got some interesting weapon vent cards, like the aforementioned shoulder-mounted cannons and even a rocket launcher that fires unblockable rounds, but those are less impressive than just activating guard vent and giving all of his gunshot super armor for a few seconds. Incisor is a character with pretty mediocre basic tools, but his assist is absolutely cracked. It fires a bunch of bubbles at your opponent, which I promise is way more threatening than it sounds. On block, the bubbles aren't a true block string, which means Incisor can sneak in a throw during any gap and there's basically nothing his opponent can do about it. It's even worse if they get hit by the bubbles, because they'll get their meter drained and they get a damage over time debuff applied to them. Basically, Incisor is a character whose source is located entirely with his assist, which makes him really reliant on meter, but super scummy when he gets going. Camo is a more by-the-books rushdown character, with powerful combos and really nice frame data on block, including one of the very rare moves that are actually plus. Because of that, his rushdown is focused less on setting up 50-50s and more on just outright denying your opponent the ability to block altogether, either through guard crushes or by setting up his unblockable assist in pressure. His vent cards are pretty unique too. His hold vent gives him a yo-yo weapon which can hold down the mid-range and deal insane guard damage at the right spacing, clear vent turns him invisible for a few seconds, and copy vent just turns him into his opponent, vent cards and all, which technically means he's the only character who can use 2 final vents in one round, though I don't know if that's particularly practical. Siren is the other sword fighter, and the first of the game's clone characters. Her move list is based on Wing Knights, but she trades away a lot of the combo potential for some really powerful weapon vent cards, as well as an assist that summons a multi-hit tornado at the opponent's position with like 10 million active frames. In this way, she's kinda like a Milia-style set play character who has low damage but really effective ways of pushing offense and keeping momentum. Sting is the second of our clone characters, with a move list based on camos. But compared to Camo, Sting is a more well-rounded fighter. He's got a really interesting forward light that behaves completely differently on hit and block. The move is a hit grab that causes one of the game's exceedingly rare hard knockdowns, but on block it leads into a completely different string if you keep pressing light. Coupled with Swing Vent, which turns Strike into the aforementioned Castlevania Judgment character, and a lightning fast assist, Strike's kit becomes one of the most unique and interesting in the game. Thrust is about as close to a grappler as this game gets. He's a beefy bruiser type with some of the highest HP in the game, and while he doesn't have any command grabs, he does make sitting still and blocking really scary. He's the only character in the game with access to 2 copies of Confine Vent, which isn't particularly useful, but he doesn't mind because instead he's got his forward heavy, a shoulder charge which doesn't hurt very much but deals a ludicrous amount of guard damage, meaning he can very easily force a guard crush on you if he catches you sleeping. Spear is a very unique character whose move list is composed almost entirely of kicks. While he does get some pretty decent slashing attacks with Spin Vent and the ability to nab someone else's weapon with Steel Vent, the main thing Spear has going for him is very situational but very damaging juggles. Most of his attacks have a set launch height on hit, which means he can get some crazy loops going so long as the walls play nice. Axe, look, he kinda sucks. His main claim to fame is that he can threaten with standing heavy from downtown, but he doesn't have a whole lot else going for him. His assist is really underwhelming, as well as his strike vent, and his only unique vent card, Freeze Vent, just instantly disables whatever vent card your opponent currently has active. A real one-trick pony whose trick isn't particularly impressive. Strike is a really unique character who focuses way more on Advent deck customization than any other character. On top of being able to customize his regular vent cards, he's also the only character who's able to pick his final vent from 3 different options. His own, as well as those of Sting and Thrust, to change both his final vent as well as his contract monster for his assist. His normals aren't particularly stellar, but he makes up for it with a breadth of vent card options, including his completely unique Unite vent, which fuses all 3 contract monsters under his control into a single one, giving him access to a pretty fun unblockable setup for the rest of the round. Wrath is the third of our clone characters, this time based on Incisor, but he trades away the set play debuff assist for just kind of being cracked. Wrath is probably the best character in the game thanks to his high HP, outrageous damage output, teleport dashes, and time vent, a full self-heal by way of Wrath rewinding time back to when he was winning. Finally, we have Onyx, who is literally the same character as Dragon Knight, but with some of the highest HP in the game, better damage and a stronger assist thanks to its final hit being unblockable. This makes sense in the lore of the show, where Onyx was a mid-season upgrade for Dragon Knight rather than a dark mirror of the character, but it's still kinda strange just seeing him be straight up better than Dragon Knight. While the 16 riders that make up the playable cast of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight aren't all huge successes, there's a surprisingly wide variety of options and playstyles here, and given how slapdash each character is with their moves all coming from other sources that Aiding happened to have on hand, it's incredible just how cohesive and fun most characters end up being, with enough interesting ways to engage with the game's systems while giving it some extra, much appreciated flavor. So, despite its concerningly numerous development constraints, I'm confident in saying that Aiding succeeded in creating a genuinely solid fighting game in Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. What would, perhaps in the hands of any other developer, be a throwaway title made purely for the paycheck, which, given the circumstances, would probably be justified, is instead a game that, while not the deepest, has far more thought put into its moving parts than you'd think it should have. And I think that's a testament to Aiding as a game developer. These guys absolutely know what they're doing. When you've been in licensed video game development for as long as these guys, you learn a lot of lessons. How to work smarter instead of harder, how to make something new out of something old, and most importantly, how to focus on making a game fun and engaging when you don't have time to iron out all the creases. While it doesn't bear the Climax Heroes name, this game certainly has the Climax Heroes spirit, and despite its regional exclusivity, the forgotten Climax Heroes game that is Dragon Knight absolutely deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as its estranged brethren. And I think if you have even a passing interest in Aiding, Kamen Rider, or niche fighting games in general, Dragon Knight is absolutely worth your time. If you want to learn more about the game and even try playing it with other people, be sure to join the Climax Heroes Discord server, link in the description, and say hi if you see me. Thanks for watching!